Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we'll be diving right back into this podcast by Russell Moore and David French. It is gold if you're into the type of things that I'm into, which is apparently looking through Big Eva's dirty closet, dirty, messy laundry, and all that other stuff, airing it out in the open to be exposed to the masses. That's the type of thing I'm into on a Monday night. So let's dive right in, and don't forget to subscribe to the Evangelical Dark Web and like the video, because Christianity Today only has 300 more subscribers than the Evangelical Dark Web, so help a brother out. And let's just dive right in.
Talked about the empathy debate.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Within evangelicalism. And I have to admit, when this first started to emerge, knowing that it was kind of derivative coming out of Doug Wilson in Idaho, I thought, well, you know, Doug Wilson has always been sort of contrarian. You know, he would write some things that were really good and helpful, but then there would be thrown into the middle of it advocacy for marijuana legalization is something where this actually would have been good to hand to somebody, but I can't do it.
Right.
So I thought maybe this is just sort of the slate pitch sort of reality coming from there. But do you think this is actually the case that
Seriously? If you think marijuana legalization is a top 20 political issue, you're insane. You're a child. You need to grow up. And Russell Moore, for that to be a deal breaker, you're insane, you're a child, you need to grow up. Stop trying to appeal to, I don't know, boomer conservatism with that position.
widespread, there is a sense that empathy itself is a vice?
Well, so my point was that empathy has become, it's not that we have, the problem is we have too much of it. And in some ways, it's not even that it's too little, it's too selective.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how is it that people rationalize being extremely empathetic to one side and not to another? Well, then one of the ways is you're going to attack the notion of empathy itself. And so, you know, so the analogy that was used in this conversation with Doug Wilson was, well, okay, if there's quicksand and a person is drowning in quicksand, you don't jump into the quicksand with them. You have one foot on the solid ground, you have a hand on a strong branch, and you reach in and you pull them out. And in this exchange, you know, that's sympathy, which is better than empathy, which is being in the quicksand. But the reality is, the way we see a lot of this play out is when you're somebody I disagree with, I want to maintain the ability to tell you you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so, but if it's somebody I agree with, well, it's not empathy, it's just agreement. And so what you begin to notice was how selective a lot of this stuff was. And then also some of the people who are allegedly having their feet on solid ground to reach into the quicksand actually had their other foot in a deeper pile of quicksand.
Right.
And so, you know, the perfect, you know, an example of the problem that I was talking about is Job's friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have put this in the piece, and I intended to put it in the piece, and I forgot. And then, like, the first commenter said, "Oh, you're condemning Job's friends."
Yeah.
They were the people who went and sat with Job when Job was suffering, but then decided that we also need to pontificate to you, Job.
Right. Right.
And they were exactly wrong. And this is what's happening around issues of race and abuse all around in the church, is people who don't really know a lot about this stuff. And, you know, maybe they're just now learning, but they don't want to be on the wrong side of sort of these waves of political correctness that sweep through right-wing evangelicalism. And so they are going to be on the quote-unquote solid ground, which is actually often not that solid at all.
Right. And it also, I think, if there's not the right kind of empathy, and obviously that doesn't mean simply just feeling what someone feels,
Right.
but the right kind of empathy, you're not even going to understand people intellectually, not just
Correct.
emotionally. So I find myself often preparing people, for instance, to deal with atheists.
That's not really true. Like, you can understand someone intellectually and not really care about how they feel. That's very possible, but I think the problem with this is it's a very useless conversation because empathy, basically, I think they did a good job of explaining what empathy is versus sympathy. And the fact that we put so much stress on empathy, it's a very hard burden to meet, and I don't think it's a very useful conversation at large. I mean, I think the word empathy is being used to drive in a lot of bad things. Particularly when you look at the whole postmodern let's have woke struggle sessions where we share our feelings and empathize with each other. And, we're supposed to accept these anecdotes that have no verification in the fact that we're supposed to believe one side without knowing what the other side's perspective is, which isn't very biblical at all. So this isn't a very useful conversation.
And to say, think about what it would be like if you had lived through this in a church, or if all you had ever seen was this when it came to Christians. Well, or to say, think about if you're a biology student, and what you think Christianity means is that you have to walk away from the very thing that you not only love, but that you see. You'd be willing to walk away from father and mother, but you think Christianity is saying to you, biology is now off the table.
Right.
If Jesus says, leave biology, great. But if he doesn't, and we say leave biology, then that becomes a problem. Say, think about that person and the sorts of questions there. I find if you don't have that, you're not even able to have a conversation to get to persuasion.
Absolutely. You have to try your best to be able to see through someone else's eyes. And one of the things I quoted in that newsletter was your discussion with Beth, where you said, look, if I'm going to have a really difficult conversation about somebody with ideas that I profoundly disagree with, I might role play that conversation, but I'm taking their position in the conversation. That's a concrete way to help someone see through somebody else's eyes. But you made a point there about atheists or people who are, maybe exevangelicals, and a lot of people get really angry at those folks.
Right.
But what have they seen? What have they experienced? And a lot of what they've experienced is people living as if the faith isn't real.
Correct.
It's like, imagine if someone says, I totally believe in aeronautics, okay? Do you want to fly to Washington? You couldn't pay me enough to get on that thing. What is that thing?
Right.
And so people are saying, we totally believe A and B and C and D about the sovereignty of God, the power of God, that Christians should be fearless in the approach to adversity, on and on and on, and then reacting completely differently, as if God doesn't have the United States of America, Donald Trump does, as if, the only way to motivate fellow believers is through abject appeals to fear. I mean, so that's saying, okay, on the one hand, I believe X and I live Y, and if you do it enough, a person's going to fairly say, you don't believe it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so he said a lot there, and let's just touch on the atheists and ex-evangelicals. I think are two separate categories, although there might be some overlap. Ex-evangelical is someone who is catechized in Orthodox Christianity and then departed. They have rejected the faith. That's what an ex-evangelical is. They were catechized in Protestantism and conservative Christian traditions. They left. So they are unbelievers. They're not lost. They've rejected the gospel. That's what an ex-evangelical is. Now, an atheist could have rejected the gospel, but may have not really, maybe their heart's not softened yet. But the idea being that, this is a separate category in which there's a lot more, to me, hope for, because, an atheist can come to Christ more, an ex-evangelical left the church and left the church's teachings. They were they were taught something and then they departed from it. There's a difference between those. And when we're talking about how, he's trying to raise a straw man, like these Christians think that Trump's going to save America, and there's a lot of people that believe that, but they weren't really the Christians that believe that. So I think this is just a giant straw man. There's nothing here. David French thinks that Donald Trump is the boogeyman. He thinks that Donald Trump is like this satanic figure. He's the one with the Trump on the brain. So I just don't see the self-awareness here.
Well, and I find myself having this conversation with a lot of secular media folks who don't know evangelicals to come in and have them role play being an evangelical.
Oh, yeah.
Who is, and I would just sort of go through and to say, look, this is what they have experienced.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why they're fearful in this way. Maybe they shouldn't be.
Right.
But this is how it makes sense to them in their minds. They're not stupid. They're not, and I think sometimes people on the outside think, well, these people are all sort of opioid addicted, whatever, having rooster fights in the backyard and so forth. And say, no, there's a logic, and not just a logic, but there's a deeper sort of emotional and spiritual calculus going on here. And if you don't know that, you're not even going to understand these people in order to speak to them.
Yeah. I put it this way because I'm always being asked by folks in D.C. or New York or L.A. or wherever, what's going on? And I've developed a very short way of saying it. If you lived where they lived and your news consumption was their news consumption, you'd have the red hat on as well, in all likelihood.
Do you hear the Fox News blaming that stereotype that, if you are conservative, you must listen to Fox News? Which, again, Fox News' viewership is way old, and the only one who really has any sort of cultural leverage outside of that channel is Tucker Carlson. He's the only one on Fox News that has a broader audience than just the people that watch Fox News. No one's really interested in what Laura Ingraham has to say, or Sean Hannity is a giant joke and a clown. Like, no one's really interested in those people. Fox News is way behind the times. They aren't on the podcast networks nearly as much as their competitors. The competitors of Fox News are way to the right. This guy's a clown. He doesn't understand evangelicals, and then he's going to all these leftist media outlets and saying, I know evangelicals. So he's a con man. That's what David French is. And Russell Moore, because they think they know an audience that hates them. And they're being asked by the people that hate that same audience to understand that same audience. So there's a huge bias, there's a huge disdain, yet he makes money doing this. But I guess being a useful idiot has its rewards.
Yeah.
There's this old statement called Miles' Law. It's a statement of sort of bureaucratic reality, but I think it applies to us all, which is where you stand is often based on where you sit. And so what is the environment you're a part of? What's your community? What's your news intake? All of these things are things that are hitting at a very deep level. And we're often thinking, oh, I'm arriving completely rationally as a complete independent thinker at all of my conclusions. When the reality is a lot of forces from our family to our geography to our community, it's like you're in the Mississippi River. And yeah, in theory, you can kind of paddle over to the bank and watch it go by, or maybe even for a little while swim against it. But most of us are in a Mississippi River of momentum about our worldview and our outlook. And
again, this is where David French fundamentally misunderstands Christians. For Christians, a Christian worldview is the alpha of their beliefs, their news consumptions, oftentimes where they're supposed to live, what they're supposed to do for a living. Christian worldview is the alpha in that scenario. Everything else is beta. I don't consume pagan news. I'm not a Christian because I don't consume pagan news. I don't consume pagan news because I'm a Christian. There's a difference, and David French fundamentally misunderstands that. Christians do not read the New York Times because it's pagan news. It's news by people who lie to them, by people who hate them. So why would they listen to that? It's entirely biblical to not consume pagan news, and to therefore search for news that will tell you the truth. And truth is absolute, it is objective, and therefore it is not something that, oh, both sides just see a part of. No, one side is just going to abjectly lie to you, and maybe the other side's too busy reacting to the side that's lying to you. And that's the issue with the news cycle, in my opinion. Conservative media does too much reaction and not enough count or its own narrative, its own reporting, its own news gathering, and there's not enough of that. But I'm digressing. But again, David French fundamentally misunderstands Christians because he assumes that they are the product of what they consume. No, with Christ, we consume the products that are edifying to the worldview that we hold, to the beliefs that we hold, to the faith that we have.
And it's, you know, so it's one thing to sort of say, ha, you guys, you rubes, and then ask them, how intellectually and religiously diverse is your newsroom?
Right, right. Yeah. Well, one way I've seen, and I just thought about this today, this is years ago. We were in a meeting on religious liberty. I remember there was a Muslim person there, and you said, he was talking about sort of the anti-Muslim backlash that was taking place. And you said, you've got to understand that in some communities, the only people who have ever encountered Muslims are people with a military son or daughter in Afghanistan or Iraq.
Yeah.
And that's the only picture that they have. So imagine if you're in that situation. That's exactly right, I think. And I think he was actually able to step back and say, oh, I can see that now, and probably helped him to be able to talk to those people.
Again, this is also an incorrect. People understand Islam. They know what Islam's about. They know that Islam will destroy the West, and Islam has always been trying to destroy the West and Western culture and Christendom. They know the history that Islam destroyed the churches in Jerusalem and Alexandria and those places. They know these things, and that they were repelled from Europe at the Battle of Tours. They know these things, and they know it was Muslims being Muslims that executed 9/11. They know these things. So, again, this is just a misunderstanding of your audience because it's not his audience.
Going forward.
Yeah, it's so much of it is this, what is the experience that you have? And Jonathan Haidt has put it incredibly well. He talks about the difference between the elephant and the rider.
Yeah.
And the rider is our rational mind, and the elephant is everything else. And we sit there and we aim all of our arguments at the rider, but if the elephant doesn't want to move, that elephant isn't moving. And if the elephant wants to move, the rider's coming along. And it's funny, it actually reminded me of the way I approached a jury in a trial back when my trial lawyer days. My thought was this: step one, get the jury to want to rule for my client. Step two, explain the reasons why their desires are correct. And so you connect with the heart, you connect with that heart and soul connection. And the mind often just tends to follow right along with that. And that's one thing when I talk about conspiracy theories to folks who are so frustrated. I said, look, you're not just talking about a set of ideas that you can send a fact check about.
That's correct.
You're talking about people's friendships, their sense of community, their sense of purpose. And then you can't fact check them out of that, because what you're essentially saying to them is replace this something that gives you purpose, gives you friendships, gives you community with what?
Who has purpose, friendships, and community over conspiracy theories? Like, what conspiracy theories is he talking about? Is he talking about QAnon? Like, really? Again, that was a LARP. And again, I've been against QAnon since I've ever heard of it, which was 2017, 2018, sometime around then. This is a joke. Do people have friendship and brotherhood over 9/11 conspiracy theories?
What? Replace it with what? Isolation, anger, emptiness. So you have to replace something with something. And so people will email me all the time. I'm really worried about my aunt.
Yeah.
Or my uncle.
Yeah, I get that too.
And one of the first things I respond with is, how much time are you spending with them? Because as great as our dispatch fact checks are, they're not enough by themselves. You have to open the heart first.
Right. Well, we talked about January 6th. Just take the Trump phenomenon off the table. A lot of people are worried that January 6th is a trial run, whether from the left or the right, in terms of a violent sort of moving away from American democracy to settling things with mob violence. Is that scaremongering, or might we be there?
It isn't scaremongering for this reason. So far, there appears to be an insufficient rejection of January 6th by the body politic to deter its future occurrence. So what I mean by that is that, a lot of Republicans are, the vast majority of Republicans do not endorse what happened on January 6th.
Right.
But they're ready to move on.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. If you want to talk about it, if you want to think about it, well, you're obsessed. You're obsessed. Move on. Move on. So what ends up happening.
David French is obsessed because this is like his moment. This is his moment. This is like one of the best things that's ever happened to him because it's something he can glom onto and use to beat the church over and over and over with. But the thing is, we are learning so much about this event. It was in many ways, a false flag. In many ways, it's not an insurrection. That's a lie. That was always a lie. And furthermore, protesting by storming Capitol buildings is pretty standard in American politics. This is nothing to apologize over. And, again, the Second Amendment is not a LARP. So what do you think the Second Amendment looks like? Because it's a lot more violent than January 6th. So, if you believe in the Second Amendment, I don't know why you would condemn January 6th that much. It's not a big deal. This is pretty standard in American politics, happens in states all the time. I don't see why when Capitol Police let people into a building, they can't enter that building.
Is outside of these cases these court cases that are happening around the country, there isn't a real sense of remorse, of repentance, of consequence. Donald Trump is still, it's hard to take him all out of this, he's still the overwhelming front runner. A good way to be sort of on the outs within the House GOP is to want to investigate January 6th and find out what happened. Just ask Liz Cheney, for example. So if you have a whole political movement that, unlike in the Nixon era, in 1974, GOP leaders went to Nixon and said, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time. So that gave essentially permission to the great, big, massive GOP voters to say, no more of that. No more. And so the next one they elected was Ronald Reagan, in so many ways, so profoundly different from Richard Nixon.
Let's talk about how they elected Jimmy Carter. Let's talk about how those same Republicans might have turned around and elected a Democrat Congress that led to this fall of Saigon. Let's talk about these things. Pretty stupid, if you ask me, the way that that election went after Nixon resigned. And Gerald Ford became president and stuff like that. It was pretty bad. And then the country got Jimmy Carter. Good job. You elected a liberal Baptist as president. And, it took a lot of effort by actual believers to unravel the church and get the church thinking about politics in a constructive way.
Nixon. But here, there isn't that structure. And so that there isn't that sense of, we can never do that again.
Yeah.
The sense is, let's not talk about that again. And I don't think there's been enough accountability to act as a deterrent. And so that makes me worried because the rhetoric just keeps escalating and escalating.
One of the things, I talked about the whole lesser of two evils thing before, talking about just voters and people. But one of the things I noticed during the Trump era that I'm sort of seeing repeated in a different way are a lot of elected officials and government folks who would say, I hate that this tweet is there, or I hate that this happened, or whatever. I'm so embarrassed. I don't know what to do. Right now, I'm hearing that from Democrats who are saying, why is President Biden so incompetent on fill in the blank, Afghanistan, the border, what have you? And I said to...
Imagine thinking this is equivalent. Imagine thinking that a tweet is equivocal to policy. How effeminate do you have to be to think that? Tweets, mean tweets, mean tweets. Oh, well, you know, Afghanistan, that's an equivalent. The border, that's an equivalent. Actually, the border's on purpose. They're not, that's a purposeful destruction of the country. That's not incompetence. So all these things, you know, it's not equivalence. These aren't equivalent laments. And the fact that Russell Moore thinks these are, you know, everyday things, that these are normal, that a mean tweet lament is the same thing as a incompetency lament, is just asinine.
To some of them, you know, even as something as relatively minor as reaching out to religious communities, Barack Obama was really good at that.
Yeah. No, he wasn't.
They would, even when it was something they knew that I was going to completely hate, they would call and say, we're going to do this that you're going to hate, and here's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
You call
Biden
that reaching out?
does not do that. The Biden administration does not do that, even though it's largely the same people.
Yeah.
Somebody had a...
Does it make a difference whether Biden reaches out to Russell Moore to say, we're going to ramrod pro-abortion policies versus Barack Obama, or versus Biden not doing that? If Obama says, hey, Russell, we're going to ramrod these policies, you okay with that? No? Cool. I think Russell Moore actually might be okay with that. You know, as long as there's welfare and pro-illegal immigration, because that's been Russell Moore's grift, like most of his tenure at the ERLC and onward. And then Biden's like, I'm not even going to make the phone call because that's a meaningless gesture. Biden has his own state religion now. He doesn't need to do religious outreach. He doesn't need to talk to Russell Moore, because Russell Moore is a useful idiot, but he's less useful than he used to be. He's useful for destroying the church, not for getting the church to believe the wrong things anymore. Now he's been weaponized against the church. That's Russell Moore's purpose now, to be weaponized against the church, not to subvert the church's beliefs in the political sphere. Russell Moore has graduated, and they don't need to phone call him anymore. They're just not that into you, bro.
The theory, I can't even remember who told me this, and said the theory they had is it's because Obama didn't feel himself to be really connected with religious people, and so he had to shore that up.
Yeah.
Biden, lifelong Catholic, he feels like I already know this stuff. But actually, I was in the...
Remember how we were inundated with the messaging that Biden was devoutly Catholic, devoutly religious? Which I think will... If you're Catholic, you should really hate that, because that's going to be used over your heads to beat you with for the rest of your continuity in America, at least for this foreseeable future, as long as there is an America.
Oval Office one time when we were dealing with, I don't know, I think it was immigration issues, and Biden said, how many evangelicals are there? 30 million? If you get all 30 million to call their members of Congress, then this will... And Obama's the one that said, Joe, if he could get 30 million people to call their members of Congress, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
Yeah, you actually are seeing this a little more clearly. Why? I mean, every president I know looks incompetent at some point and then comes back. Is that what's happening, or is it worse than that?
Well, you know, you raise a really good...
You get what you voted for.
Good question. You raise a question I'm asking myself, because right now I'm beginning to get that, I'm getting that whiff, that aroma of Jimmy Carter, which was well-meaning man, you know, ran to turn the page against corruption and a really harsh and terrible time in American history. A lot of sort of initial hope that he could heal divisions, and then he wasn't up to the job. That was one of the things that became so clear about Carter. And he was living in a different time. He was facing the Soviet Union that seemed at the time to be at the peak of its powers. We seemed to be the power in decline. There was a lot going on. Hostage crisis, Iranian Revolution, gas lines. Sounds kind of like how rough things have been. And he wasn't up to it. He wasn't up for the job. And now America was very fortunate in that the GOP had already turned the page, and so it was looking elsewhere. But where it feels like for where we are right now is, imagine it's late 1977, and Carter is Carter, but the GOP is going more Nixon.
Yeah.
And that's what is distressing to me. But yeah, the Afghanistan withdrawal.
During the Jimmy Carter era, the Republican Party shifted to the right and then would nominate Ronald Reagan. I think we could see that. The problem is the Trump factor. I don't want Trump to run again because he obviously proved, in many ways, incapable of the task. His staffing decisions, his lockdowns. Branch Covidianism is a state religion because of Donald Trump, because he didn't fire Fauci. He didn't get his CDC under control. These are, gain of function research was funded under Trump's watch. All these things were true. So I don't get, I think we need to learn lessons, but I don't think the GOP establishment wants to learn that lesson. I think they can, I think they will just endorse Trump because it's the easiest decision to make, not because it's the right decision to make. But I don't see, I think we need to move to the right, and David French obviously doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want someone who's more serious about governing than Donald Trump was. And that's not to say that Trump was terrible. He was like a C president in an era where Republicans are mostly Ds and Fs. But, we need an A. We need an A.
Really shook me in both that it happened.
And that they didn't see how bad it, I mean, it wasn't
Right.
This was a failure and we're going to correct it. It was, it was going to happen eventually. It happened quicker than we thought.
Yeah, it's quicker than we thought. And hey, here, look at the bright side. We were able to do an emergency airlift pretty well. Well, yeah, I mean, the American military can move a heck of a lot of people from point A to point B when it mobilizes its resources. But we took more casualties in the evacuation than we had taken in years.
Yeah.
In years. And it was like the third or fourth worst single day of casualties in the entire Afghan war. The total and then we have to focus on the human rights catastrophe that's unfolding. And, look, I wrote a whole thing about this, about how the United States and the world, ever since the Holocaust, has said, never again, nope,
right,
nope. And then mass atrocities keep happening, and we go, well, we've learned our lesson, and we're not going to let it happen. And in 2005, world powers agreed on a principle called a duty to protect, that countries have a duty to protect their own citizens against mass atrocities, but if a country cannot protect its citizens against mass atrocities, then the international community needs to. And that has just been thrown out the wind, just thrown away. And then,
because that was made during a height of neoconservatism. Time to throw that away too.
Americans can't say, well, I mean, I hate it for these Afghan women and girls. I hate it, but not our problem anymore.
Yeah.
It's not our problem anymore. And he's just a neocon. These Bush 2 conservatives are the worst. David French, Jonah Goldberg, Eric Erickson, Ben Shapiro to some degree. I don't know if he's completely Bush era, but still, these people are the worst. They just want to subvert the movement. They want to hold it back from going to the right where we need to be, because we are embracing too much of the left, and we're just 10 years behind them. As we like to say in America, conservatism is just progressivism driving the speed limit. We cannot be that anymore. We cannot afford to be driving the speed limit behind progressivism. We need to actually be going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
We spent 20 years telling and teaching them that they could rely on us.
Right.
And then to yank the rug out from under them like that, it didn't just feel like a grievous strategic wrong for interests of our nation. It just felt like a grievous moral wrong.
Yeah, I was talking the other day to someone who has fled Afghanistan, lived under Taliban rule, then lived over the...
I think I'm going to cut it off here because I think the conversation has climaxed on its seriousness, because I do believe that they have more zany hijinks, like which one of them didn't like the Snyder Cut, which I'm actually curious about which one it is, but I don't have the energy to make a video about that, nor do I see the need to continue to get to that point. So with that said, I'm going to cut it off. Again, my name is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this video, do also like the video, subscribe to the channel, and also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org, and you can become a subscriber there with our Patreon-like system, but also read the articles there, daily articles. Some of them aren't made videos out of, so definitely catch that so you don't miss the content, and subscribe to that RSS feed and all that as well. So let me know what you think about what I think, and I will catch you on the next one.